Practice makes perfect is a common mantra for anyone trying to master a new skill. Aspiring musicians, dedicated athletes, students grinding homework problem sets. The message is clear: put in the hours and success will follow. But in reality, the hours you spend practicing are only a small part of the equation, at least for academic success. If we are slicing the pie of things that cause your grades into pieces, the amount of good practice accounts for this small one. What are the other slices? I'll explain that in the rest of the video. The conventional wisdom about how to excel in school is at best incomplete and at worst actively misleading. You cannot become great at everything. If you're unlucky, you may not be able to become great at anything. Practice does not make perfect. You are hard limited by your innate abilities that will stop you from ever catching up to people more talented than you. Learning is more like bodybuilding. Training optimally and doing PEDs will improve your physique, but the difference between you and Ronnie Coleman is not training and drugs. If you are, air quotes, unlucky, you may never look like a pre-steroids Ronnie, even with all the drugs and training in the world. The air quotes because I don't think this actually matters all that much. I'm going to cut through the noise and look at what the science says about what actually moves the needle on your grades in particular. I'll look at the much hyped concept of deliberate practice, the most effective study habits, and the role of intelligence and personality traits. While the answers might not be what you expect or want to be true, having realistic expectations about what you can and cannot do helps you focus your efforts more effectively and pursue goals that are actually achievable, avoiding motivational dead ends from chasing dreams that are unachievable, just because you bought into the myth that everyone can be good at anything if they just dedicate themselves to it. Let's start with a concept that has by now permeated popular culture and academic discourse alike: deliberate practice. Coined by K. Anders Ericsson and his colleagues, deliberate rather than regular practice targets what you're bad at, uses feedback, and demands full focus. Regular practice often reinforces what you already know, avoids mistakes, and runs on autopilot. Regular practice may even be pleasant, putting you in a kind of flow state of being just challenged enough to be completely focused on what you're doing, but also still perform well. Deliberate practice is effortful and often unpleasant because you're doing something you're not good at. It's the difference between playing a piano piece you already mastered, which most people would still call practice, and picking a particular skill or sequence you're bad at and drilling that with great focus. The narrative has been that deliberate practice is the key to expertise, leading to the popularization of the 10,000-hour rule. The idea that 10,000 hours of deliberate practice are necessary and maybe even sufficient to achieve mastery. But this overstates the case. A meta-analysis by McNamara, Hambrick, and Oswald from 2014 examined studies across various domains of expertise. They found that deliberate practice explained 26% of the variance in performance for what they call games, so think chess, 21% for music, assessed mostly via sight-reading sheet music, 18% for sports, so here we're talking about differences in competition performance, and here's the kicker: only 4% for education, also less than 1% for professions, whatever that means, I'm not entirely sure. That means while deliberate practice is certainly important in domains like music and sports, its explanatory power for academic performance is remarkably small. To put a finer point on it, if you're relying on deliberate practice to ace your exams, you're missing 96% of the picture. Before I move on from this study, I'd like to emphasize that explaining 26 and 21% of the variance implies a correlation of 0.51 and 0.46 respectively. Variance explained refers to the coefficient of determination, not the correlation coefficient. These are substantial correlations any social scientist should be proud of, at least for playing chess, instruments, and sports, not so much for academic achievement. Another study by Hambrick et al. From 2013 re-examined the role of deliberate practice in chess and music only, two domains often cited as prime examples of the impact of deliberate practice. They found that deliberate practice explained about 34% of the variance in chess performance and approximately 30% in music. Old news. But they also highlighted a critical point. There's enormous variability in the amount of practice even among elite performers. Some individuals reach expert levels with significantly less practice, while others, despite putting in copious hours, never achieve the same level of mastery. Specifically, they say, quote, "Categorical claims are incorrect. The evidence is quite clear that some people do reach an elite level of performance without copious practice, while other people fail to do so despite copious practice," unquote. And, quote, "One player in a chess sample took 26 years of serious involvement in chess to reach a master level, while another player took less than 2 years to reach this level. Some normally functioning people may never acquire expert performance in certain domains, regardless of the amount of deliberate practice they accumulate," unquote. Consider this bar chart of the amount of players at the intermediate, expert, and master level who invested between 0 and more than 22,500 hours of practice, in their own estimation at least. Clearly, the curves shift to the right with greater mastery, but it is simply not the case that every master practiced a lot and everyone who practiced a lot was a master. Around 50% of masters had practiced less than 10,000 hours. Around 20% of intermediates had practiced more than 10,000 hours. Further challenging the narrative, McNamara and Matra from 2019 attempted to replicate Erickson's original seminal study on violinists. Their replication found a substantially smaller effect size for deliberate practice than the original study and raised methodological concerns about the initial findings, suggesting that the original study might have overestimated the impact of deliberate practice. So if deliberate practice isn't the sole determinant of academic success, what else is at play? The researchers in this group point to several alternative factors. There is starting age. Some studies suggest a so-called critical period for skill acquisition, earlier starting age correlating with higher performance in chess, for example, independent of the accumulated deliberate practice. But I think this may be confounded by underlying talent. More talented people simply tend to start doing the things they are talented at earlier. Then there are intelligence or general cognitive abilities. We'll get back to this more in depth later, but for example, young chess players in one study had an average IQ more than a standard deviation above the population average. IQ also predicted performance on chess tasks, even in highly rated players. Similarly, in music, IQ correlates positively with performance. Personality also plays a role. We'll get back to this one later too, but let me just point out a nuance here in the deliberate practice chapter. While traits like discipline affect performance in all domains, this effect may be largely mediated through encouraging more deliberate practice. In simpler terms, they don't independently explain differences in performance. They primarily influence how and how much someone practices. Finally, there is genetics. Some of the differences in performance may be due to specific abilities not sensitive to training. For example, steady hands for playing an instrument or ability to concentrate for learning. Studies have found heritability estimates for musical achievement and quote-unquote exceptional talent in other domains, ranging from not quite 40% to over 90%. This implies that some predispositions to excel might be, at least in part, inherited. While this is clearly the favorite explanation of the authors, the concept of heritability is slippery as it is not congruent with the colloquial understanding of malleability, so I wouldn't invest this point with too much weight. But in essence, the research on deliberate practice leads to this conclusion. Deliberate practice is a piece of the puzzle, but far from the whole picture. For academic achievement in particular, the amount of deliberate practice is surprisingly irrelevant. While time spent studying is one aspect, quality of the studying actually happening during that time is another. Let's investigate that one. So how about study habits or methods? Like study duration, these are under your control. First, what are quote-unquote good study habits? The distinction often made is between active and passive study strategies. You may have heard about active recall or about how highlighting text is a passive learning technique. A review by Danowski et al. From 2013 provides an assessment of 10 popular learning techniques, categorizing them by their utility. None of this will be new to you if you are aware of good study habits, but just for completeness' sake. Under high utility techniques, we have practice testing and distributed practice. Practice testing means testing oneself on the material, such as using flashcards, answering practice questions, or doing mock exams. The benefits of practice testing are robust, generalizing across various learning conditions. Distributed practice, also called spaced repetition, involves spacing out study sessions over time rather than cramming them all at once. For example, instead of studying 6 hours straight for one day, you'd study for 2 hours each day for 3 days. Moderate utility techniques encompass elaborative interrogation, self-explanation, and interleaved practice. Elaborative interrogation just means asking and answering why questions about facts or concepts. For example, why is this particular thing true? Self-explanation is closely related, means explaining aloud the steps taken during problem solving or how new information relates to what you already know. Interleaved practice just means mixing different types of problems or topics within a single study session, rather than studying one topic exhaustively before moving to the next. These techniques may actually not do anything. The evidence is quite weak. And then there are the low utility techniques of summarization, highlighting, mnemonics, mental imagery, and rereading. The problem with summarization is that students rarely do it well without explicit training. Highlighting is perhaps the most ubiquitous study habit, but it is largely ineffective. Mnemonics are effective for specific tasks, like learning foreign languages, but its generalizability is limited. Mental imagery just means creating mental images while reading. This can improve memory for text, but its effectiveness diminishes with more complex or abstract material. Rereading is what it says on the tin, repeatedly reading the same material. This is highly inefficient. It usually does not improve comprehension or retention beyond a single initial reading. The feeling of familiarity it creates is often mistaken for actual learning. These techniques are completely ineffective or actively detrimental. Zeroing in on active strategies, Welk, Shannon et al. From 2021 investigated self-reported study habits and their relation to exam performance in college students. On average, about half of students' study time was dedicated to active approaches, and both the number of active strategies employed and the proportion of study time spent using them positively predicted exam performance. The study controlled for overall study time. But this entire study may be horribly confounded, since for some reason they did not split their students into treatment and control and then just tell them which study methods to use. They're controlled for a rough measure of previous knowledge, so it's not entirely hopeless, but I treat this more as suggestive evidence. Much more interestingly, they also find that when a student started studying was not related to performance on either immediate or delayed exams. For instance, starting 6 days before an exam versus closer to the date did not make a difference. Time spent studying is either not causally efficacious or is entirely offset by other things. However, one significant negative predictor was distraction. Students who reported being distracted for about 20% of their study time performed worse on exams. Again, this may be confounded. Someone with a more distraction-prone brain may also be dumber or worse at learning in general. Take this as merely suggestive as well. Better evidence about the unimportance of time spent studying and the importance of study habits comes from Craig and Kunzel's meta-analysis from 2008. They look at study habits, skills, and attitudes as a quote-unquote third pillar of academic success next to intelligence and prior knowledge. They find that motivation and study skills exhibit a moderate relationship with grades, while the raw amount of time spent studying correlates with grades in specific classes at essentially 0 and with overall GPA at 0.15 to 0.2. Explaining less than 5% of the variance in grade performance. This suggests that while total study time is a factor, the effectiveness of that time, driven by good study habits and motivation, is substantially more important. Time management, concentration, and using active recall, for example, were each twice as important as time spent studying, and motivation was 3 times as important. In summary, the evidence strongly suggests that how you study is far more critical than simply how much you study. Employing active, effortful strategies like practice testing and distributed practice, and maybe minimizing distractions, are the true levers for improving academic outcomes. That's it for how much and how you study, whether deliberate or not. The last part of the puzzle I consider are your traits. Your height and muscle mass matter for sports performance, so it's not unreasonable to think that who you are, rather than what you do, also matters for academic success. While deliberate practice and effective study habits are largely within your control, intelligence and personality traits are often perceived as more immutable. First, a quick primer. When we are talking about intelligence in this context, we are primarily referring to general cognitive ability, usually measured by IQ tests. While those tests spit out one number, the hypothesis that there is one underlying G factor that is measuring the quote-unquote real intelligence was disproven by Spearman almost immediately after he himself first came up with it. The most mainstream model of intelligence, Kettle-Horn-Carroll, assumes a hierarchical structure. There are several broad abilities, for example fluid reasoning, crystallized knowledge, working memory, processing speed, visual spatial ability, that underlie many more narrow abilities. The broad factors are themselves correlated, and that correlation structure simply statistically gives rise to a higher order general factor, G. But this is more of a summary statistic, like how the average and standard deviation can summarize data. And it's not pointing to anything in the real world. Whatever it is, intelligence clearly encompasses reasoning, problem solving, and the ability to learn from experience. But there is a wrinkle about the relationship between IQ and learning. IQ does not actually predict how quickly you will learn new information. Taking, for example, children's math ability over time, IQ scores predict the intercept here at the left quite well. That is, initial ability, previous knowledge, and the very early stages of new learning depend on intelligence. But the slope of the curve, the improvement in being able to perform math, is close to independent of the intercept. That is, over these 6 years, the children performing at the top at the beginning improve by not quite 250 points, and the children at the bottom in the beginning also improve by that amount. Schooling does not close gaps, but it also does not favor more intelligent children. Note that the median 9th grade child has barely caught up to a top 3rd grader after 6 years of schooling. So much for what intelligence is. Personality, on the other hand, is often described using the Big Five model. Let's say we are looking at a set of words that could be used to describe someone's personality. Sociable, kind, insecure, reliable, creative, and so on. You'll notice that when we describe someone as deep and curious, we are more likely to describe them as creative too, but not necessarily as reliable or considerate or outgoing. Similarly, if we describe someone as organized and hardworking, we probably also call them disciplined, reliable, and thorough, but not necessarily trusting, nervous, or cheerful. We may, but we may also not. In short, some of these attributes seem to correlate and some don't. Doing this kind of pattern finding more systematically reveals 5 large groups of attributes. Openness to experience for the group of imagination, curiosity, unconventional ideas. Conscientiousness for organized, responsible, disciplined, achievement-oriented. Extroversion for outgoing and sociable, but also energetic and thrill-seeking. Agreeableness for cooperation, caring, and trust. Neuroticism or emotional stability in the other direction for proneness to negative emotions like anxiety, anger, or depression. Among these, conscientiousness is particularly relevant to academic performance, as we will see. So, what do the studies say about the impact of these factors on grades? A landmark longitudinal study by Deary et al. From 2007 followed over 70,000 English children. They examined the association between psychometric intelligence at age 11 and educational achievement in national examinations at age 16. The correlation between intelligence and educational achievement, so in GCSE scores, was a robust 0.81. Variance explained in different subjects ranged from 58.6 in mathematics and 48 in English to 18.1% in art and design. Or phrased differently, for students of average intelligence at age 11, almost 60% achieved 5 or more GCSEs at grades above a C. A standard deviation increase in intelligence boosted the 60% to a success rate of 90%. A standard deviation decrease, on the other hand, dropped the 60% to 16%, 1/6. Reinforcing this, a meta-analysis by Roth et al. From 2015, which synthesized data from over 105,000 participants, found a population correlation of 0.54 between standardized intelligence tests and school grades. If cognitive tests are good at predicting anything, they are good at predicting how good you are at taking other tests. IQ differences account for at least a quarter of the variance in grades between people, about twice as much as study habits explain and 5 times as much as time spent studying explains. Beyond intelligence, personality traits also contribute to academic performance. A meta-analysis from Poropat from 2009 looks at the relationship between the big 5 personality traits and academic performance across primary, secondary, and tertiary education levels. Conscientiousness emerged as the strongest and most consistent predictor of academic performance across all academic levels. As always, conscientiousness explains academic performance independently of intelligence. This suggests that being organized, disciplined, and achievement-oriented is an important asset in its own right. Agreeableness and openness also show correlations with academic performance, but at an imperceptibly low level. Agreeable individuals, being cooperative and compassionate, might benefit from better relationships with teachers and peers. Openness to experience, reflecting curiosity and intellectual engagement, naturally aligns with academic pursuits. But again, these effects are very small. The importance of conscientiousness is on the order of magnitude of study habits, time management, or concentration. But that shouldn't be surprising, as those things just are the behaviors that characterize the trait of conscientiousness. The point isn't so much that your personality can give you an edge, or the opposite of an edge in academics, but that your tendency to engage in the types of studying behavior that facilitate better performance simply is part of your personality and not something that can be chosen at will. The heritability of personality traits is at least 60%. In conclusion, your cognitive abilities and personality are the big hitters in determining your performance in school and academics generally. Next most important is how you study. This includes external methods like relying on high-quality techniques, active recall via testing yourself and spaced repetition, and internal psychological facts like your focus and motivation. While you can choose the techniques you employ, your disposition to study dutifully is just your personality again, and therefore also not up to you. Finally, time spent studying, whether in deliberate practice or not, is for all intents and purposes irrelevant. As long as you do in fact study, it does not seem to matter how much of it you do or even how close to a test you do it. But summing up how much these factors explain still leaves a huge gap. Intelligence explains maybe 30%, generously study techniques and personality explain 10% each, study time explains a rounded up 5%, that leaves 45% of differences in grades between people unexplained. What closes the gap? Of course, prior knowledge will play a role in how well you do in a subject. This is not helpful practically though. What kind of advice would it be to tell someone asking how to improve their grades to just already know more about the subject? Some genetic factors that aren't mediated by intelligence and personality may also play a role, but they may also not. And finally, measurement error will probably close the gap. Teachers are no atomic clocks. They rate the same student performance slightly differently at different points in time or in different but irrelevant circumstances. So you cannot study your way into genius, and you shouldn't expect to become someone you have never been just by changing how you study. You are who you are and not someone else. If you have what it takes to become the next Einstein, Feynman or Witten, or even just a math Olympiad medalist or at the top of the class at Caltech, you will know. These people are unicorns, and you don't need to look twice or do careful evaluations to spot a unicorn in a herd of horses. To a large extent, you cannot control how successful you will be in your academic endeavors. But what can you control, since that is the only thing actually relevant to any decisions you might make? You can focus on effective study methods. Abandon the illusion of productivity offered by passive strategies like highlighting and rereading. Instead, embrace techniques proven to be highly effective. Active recall and spaced repetition should be the exclusive means by which you learn. Essentially, all of your learning should take place within a flashcard app like Anki. You can minimize distractions. Quality of study time trumps quantity. Create a dedicated, distraction-free study environment. Turn off notifications and focus intently during your study blocks. You can try to cultivate conscientiousness. While personality traits are relatively stable, the behaviors associated with conscientiousness can be developed, and ultimately there's nothing physically stopping you from simply acting like a highly conscientious person. Even if you have schizophrenia, you do not need to listen to the voices. This means practically being organized, make a schedule, stay organized and keep track of progress, assignments, deadlines, and being disciplined. Stick to your study plan. Nothing is physically stopping you from just doing that. Develop routines and habits that support consistent effort. Habits can also be psychological. To highly conscientious people, not sticking to schedules and obligations feels like breaking the law. Imagine you will end up in poverty if you do not study. Imagine you won't meet the love of your life if you fail to get a particular job or internship because you slacked in school. Imagine how all other students are putting in the hours, clicking away at Anki cards. They are leaving you behind. You will be an outsider among them. And they will get all the chances in life you hope to get if you don't catch up. None of this is true, but if you felt like it was, you'd act more conscientiously. None of this advice is original or novel. You will find similar recommendations in any other good video on good study habits. The path to academic success is about understanding the complex interplay of factors that contribute to performance and then strategically applying your effort where it will yield the greatest returns. You can't be good at just anything just because you decided you wanted to be. Once you've ruled out the paths that are inaccessible to you, like trying to dunk when you are 4'10", it's about working smarter with a clear-eyed understanding of what the science says about effective studying. Another thing to consider is about your internal disposition towards people who are dumber and less educated than you. While most of this video was about tempering expectations regarding what you yourself can achieve, the selection effect of first clicking on this video and then watching to the end means your expected scholastic aptitude is higher than average. Being quote-unquote smart in the colloquial sense is not as hardwired as height, but it's not too far off either. When you think less of people less smart than you, it's more like blaming a short person for not trying harder to be tall than it is like blaming a criminal for committing a crime. Nature isn't fair. It does not dole out abilities and positive attributes according to moral desert. If you are more talented than most people, you should feel the weight of responsibility more than the elation at being God's favorite.